Alrighty, first If Lab podcast ever episode.
Ever. First one. Here we
Ever.
are.
Okay, well, I guess I can start with an introduction to all of you listening. Welcome to the If Lab podcast. A little bit about like the mission statement, I guess, is like the If Lab is a lab where students, researchers, and industry leaders collaborate to pioneer breakthroughs in AI, blockchain, and emerging technologies in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And I guess the first thing that we ought to do is learn more about the founder of the lab, Alex. So, Alex, who are you? What do you do? What do we need to know about you?
Yeah. So thank you, Magnus. Thank you for hosting, like you said, the first episode of the If Lab podcast. So for all y'all listening, it's the first time we're diving into it. We'll see how it goes. So Magnus says, I'm Alex Murray. I am a professor at the University of Oregon, where I teach entrepreneurship and tech innovation classes. Prior to that, I got my PhD at the University of Washington and was on faculty at ETH in Zurich, Switzerland, prior to coming to the University of Oregon. Have a bit of startup experience, have a bit of tech experience, if you will, just kind of diving into blockchain technology, working on some projects there, and I've done a lot of research on how humans interact with AI, decentralized governance, and increasingly doing projects on synthetic stakeholders, so agents and how they can represent, say, the natural environment or animals, future human generations in corporations and in other entities. So really looking at that human tech interface, but then also the social and societal implications of that interface.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, I think, AI and blockchain are such revolutionary technologies, and I think that the impact they can have going forward is going to be something that's really hard to even like wrap our heads around because they're so new, and I think we've really only just tapped like the very tip of the iceberg. I guess, Alex, one thing that I'm interested in personally is what made you become really interested in AI and blockchain and these other disruptive technologies?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So I think if you look just at the world writ large, right, just at society, at systems, at structures, there's a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of things that are ineffective, there's a lot of things that, could be organized better, could potentially be decentralized. I even hesitate to use the word better, but they can just be organized in a different way. And I think that's what gravitated me to kind of the powerful organizational implications of blockchain. Gosh, I was still a PhD student at the University of Washington. So we're talking like 7, 8, 9 years ago now, when I first started thinking about, this could have, revolutionary impacts. And then that kind of actually got me to AI. Obviously, AI has been discussed since the 50s, and, the current, Gen AI revolution, if you will, is, we're very much at the early stages of that. But it was actually blockchain that got me to AI, thinking, hold on, like, what does it mean? And actually some papers I was writing a couple years back now on, human blockchain interfaces and what that looked like. And then also, well, what would happen if you throw AI into the mix and you have a human AI interface? And then even thinking beyond that, what does human AI blockchain interface look like, particularly if you remove the human, just have an AI and a blockchain working together. Say you have an agent in a decentralized autonomous organization where maybe, so a DAO, which is built on blockchain, it's an organization that is, decentralized. It makes autonomous decision based on smart code that's encoded into blockchain. And just thinking that, well, what does it mean when you introduce an AI agent to, say, govern such an entity or to proxy vote for humans? Or to represent certain groups of humans. Or speaking on behalf of the DAO externally, to have a Twitter account. There's a lot of ways you can think this could go, to politic, to run for office. So there's a lot of ways you can think about AI in a decentralized setting. And it just was really interesting. And it was honestly, for me, a means to think, are there different ways, I hesitate once again to say better, but are there different ways to organize and to structure society than what we are currently seeing?
Can I ask, why do you hesitate to say better? Like, why not go as far to say, actually, this can be better? Like,
yeah,
AI can help, or blockchain can help better do something. What's the hesitation coming from?
No, it's a great question. And I think it's yet to be borne out empirically, right? We've seen a lot of, decentralized organizations kind of falter. You see voter apathy. You see the same issues you see in human-based systems without blockchain that are appearing, in these blockchain-based systems and these decentralized organizations. Similarly, with AI, there isn't, people use the word techno-utopia, where AI is, curing cancer and, solving or identifying new drug compounds to solve, rare diseases. And, it's advancing society, but there's also a world where AI can be used to surveil heavily or to automate processes and kind of remove humans from systems and completely disrupt society. So I think there's still these outstanding questions around, the implications of the technologies themselves. Well, yes, I think there is incredible power for them to do incredible good. And ideally, that's one of the goals of the lab, right, is to look at what is the impact of these technologies on society? How can they be designed in ways that enhance human performance or augment humans to, do more or do things that are more creative or more interesting, or to, like I said, enhance scientific structures or scientific systems. For instance, you can use blockchain to decentralize science and tokenize science, and that could actually lead to a lot of efficiencies and effectiveness in the scientific publication process. But we've yet to see all of that yet, right? A lot of it's theoretical, a lot of it's conceptual. So that's why I hesitate to say that we are seeing a better world because of the technologies. And to be fair, there is a world where that's not the case. It actually exacerbates some of the issues we see in society, and technology actually makes them worse.
Totally. And I think these are all things that we're going to discuss more of in the podcast. And I think this is something that I don't think there's really any concrete answers so far as to or moral implications of how good is it, whether we should. And I think if you're listening, I don't know, it kind of gets me riled up. I'm like, oh man, how is this going to get used? How's humanity going to use this? And I think there's a lot of really interesting dynamics that are going to be going on. So yeah, that's going to be super fun. I guess to bring it back towards the lab, what made you want to start the If Lab to begin with? What was the first seed that led to wait, actually, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to approach that question. So the first is just looking in your surrounding environment, like what's available currently, what do students have access to, and where are the gaps or where are the holes that you could fill? And if you look at the University of Oregon, you look around, there's an entrepreneurship center that does a really great job fostering, startups and fostering, the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I think that's fantastic. That's not what we're doing, and you have the Knight campus that is really focused on bioengineering and, deep science labs. That's great. That's not what we're doing either. But then there's this kind of lane where, there's a lot, like we said earlier, there's a lot happening with technology right now. There's a lot of advancements that are happening very rapidly. And there are ways to bring interdisciplinary and cross, campus teams together to examine, build things, and try to understand what is the impact on society, right? There's no commercialization goal in the lab. And I want to make that clear. It really is around research. It's around trying to understand what are the impacts of these technologies. Or if we build things inside the lab, how can they be utilized? What implications do they have in the workplace? And that's why, for me, the focus really is on, can we write scientific papers or academic papers? Can we have a blog? Can we that, kind of disseminates and translates scientific studies to broader swaths of the population? Can we have can we have a podcast where we, make things accessible that we discover in the lab to broader audiences, or we bring people in to have conversations? So for me, it's really around the process of discovery. It's asking what if, the lab, technically it started as standing, Intelligent Futures Lab, but it really has become the If Lab. And it's early stages, but that's kind of the name that's caught on. And for me, that's kind of cool because it allows you to ask what if again. It asks you to say, what could the world be? And to something you said earlier, I try not to make should normative statements, right? This is how the world should be, or this is what we should be doing, but it's to make informed statements of this is what the world could look like if technology is deployed in this way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So I guess it's kind of that two-pronged thing, right? There's a lot of energy around the technologies on campus. How do we harness that energy? How do we build? How do we talk about these, really important topics? And then how do we carve out a lane that is distinct from what's already going on at the University of Oregon, but can also really, be collaborative and enhance all of those other initiatives on campus as well, right? If we can discover something at the human AI interface that could help a Knight campus lab or a startup coming out of the entrepreneurship center, that's fantastic. But for me, it's much around process, it's around discovery, it's around curiosity, and it's not really around any end goal. And that's what I really want to remove from the lab, right? It's not, oh, we need to publish this paper, or oh, we need to start this venture, or oh, we need to make this discovery or solve this. No, it's let's just play again. Let's try to understand and think critically about human and tech, and then spread that more broadly.
Totally. So what are some things right now with the lab that you're really excited about? What are some projects that people can expect to soon hear from the If Lab?
Yeah, great question. So Students at Oregon are fantastic. So, two of the projects that they're starting to build, actually three, but two are directly related to the University of Oregon. One is kind of this, AI agent to help as a TA for classes. And they're designing that for various classrooms to say, okay, what does it look like when students interact with this TA? Utilize it to be a study buddy. Can we utilize it to, really distill information in a way that's helpful and enhances the learning process? So they're building those for various classes. And then there's also one that kind of serves as a course advisor. So beyond the classroom unit of analysis, it's kind of the university level, right? So how does that inform students, okay, this is what classes you should take, quarter over quarter, given the course schedule, given the degree requirements. So kind of help them make course plans. So those are two of the things they're building internally, and trying to get feedback from, faculty and staff, but then also students who are utilizing and interfacing with these technologies. So that's kind of two of the local projects. And then one we are starting to build that you should hear something about relatively soon. This is actively ongoing, but it's an agent that looks at, say, all the various building codes for greater Los Angeles, particularly in the Altadena and Pacific Palisades neighborhoods and areas, to understand what can we rebuild on lots. So making sense of all those codes, putting out, okay, here are, the stipulations and requirements for this lot. So then an architect, a contractor, builder can get their job done faster. They can get in there and say, okay, this is the buildable area on this lot of land. This is the height requirements and restrictions. These are the setbacks. And it just streamlines some of that process. So we're hoping to build that and make that available down in LA very soon, just as another project within the lab. So that's something that particularly excites me. And then I'm doing some stuff. I won't go too in depth here, but I'm doing some stuff on decentralized governance. So I'm working with NounsDAO. And we built Govern Noun, which is an agent that's working in the community alongside UMass to kind of enhance that governance process in a decentralized organization.
Yeah, I mean, those are all super exciting things, and I mean, man, that'd be so interesting to have like a TA. I couldn't imagine that, like,
right?
Like what would that? I don't even know how that would look like, but I'm sure that would be a really good tool, because I like having the lack of office hours can sometimes be such a detriment, and sometimes you just want to ask someone that ChatGPT might not give you quite the response that you're looking for, like the nuance, the depth, as perhaps like a model trained on like more relevant like data.
Totally. Something that's less general purpose, that's more specified for that context and that setting. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the idea of having an agent, and I think this is a general trend of AI being used to kind of cut the bureaucratic process out of things to help, rebuild communities in LA who were affected by the fires, or, help get processes going faster so that we can actually implement policies rather than wait like 10 years until you actually start making progress. Because there's so many things like that, which, we just simply don't have like the human power to do it by hand.
Yeah, and you said something interesting there around cutting bureaucracy. I almost think in a way it's more about these agents can allow bureaucracy to work. It allows it to actually, accomplish the goals it was initially put in place to do. Whereas you have these, lawyers and people who are essentially trying to make sense of all the red tape, all the laws, all the systems, all the structures. And now you can make sense of it faster to execute and, have outcomes that are more beneficial for communities. And I think that's one of the cool benefits is we're not getting rid of bureaucracy. I do think bureaucracy does have some benefits. It allows us to structure society. It allows us to avoid maybe some detrimental outcomes that are disadvantageous for societies. But however, it also allows us to streamline those processes to say, okay, this is the direction we're going to go more quickly.
Totally. And I think, there's a lot of things that, it's more nuanced than just simply, oh, let's just cut it out. Like there's reasons we have it to begin with. There's safeguards. But yeah, no, those are super exciting, and I'm really excited, like just personally as like a fan of, this field, to learn more and see like how this can be used positively going forward. Because I think there's a lot of nervousness. There's a lot of almost doom, almost manifesting fear mongering amongst people who maybe aren't versed in AI, and some who are versed in AI, of the potential downsides. And I think that I think one of the things the lab can really do is like say, hey, like here are a lot of ways we can use this technology in like powerful ways that aren't going to lead to like, I don't know, a cold winter, as some predict.
Yeah. And I think that's the key to regulation here as well, and also just to understanding. Because if you look at corporations, they can easily use it to automate processes, right? And why wouldn't they if that's to, help them accomplish their corporate goals more efficiently? So without regulation, yeah, we might see, the human workforce losing jobs pretty rapidly. Similarly, if you look at governments and you have more, say, autocratic states that are going to use AI to surveil their populations to govern more effectively, that's something that we also need to regulate and think about very seriously. I think, you bring up that people are concerned, like rightfully so. I do think these are very valid concerns around the deployment of technology, but there's also a ton of benefits that can be realized. It can enhance, studies show it can enhance human performance in the workplace, and just creative performance. It can unlock new opportunities. So I just think there's a lot of techno ethics, if you will, that need to be considered, and written, and a plan and safeguards put in place to allow the technologies that we're seeing manifest and be realized at this point in time benefit society.
Yeah, and I think this kind of segues like perfectly into something that I think, like the podcast, one of those conversations we had when we were first talking about it in the entrepreneurship suite was sort of that with all the technology and the media landscape that we're in currently, there's a lot of lack of critical thinking. There's a lot of TikTok clips and YouTube shorts and Instagram reels where a lot of the information being presented are simply taglines. They're so surface level. And I recently found this quote from Carl Sagan that I just want to read a quick bit of, because I think it's such an accurate description of the times we live in, and also kind of direction that the US is sort of heading in. And I think to just preface this, he wrote this in 1995. So this is internet, our early days, tech boom's happening. And so he writes, I have a foreboding of an America in my children or grandchildren's time when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, and when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, and when the people have lost their ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good, what's true, we slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. And I think when I read that quote, I'm like, whoa, that is just a fire quote. But I think right now, AI is concentrating into the hands of those in Silicon Valley, and with kind of more superpower governments in China, and there's a couple in Europe as well. But most people have no idea what AI even does. How does it work? What is LLM? What does that mean? What is Gen AI? How's that different from just regular AI? There's so many questions that so many people have, and that's just on AI. I mean, I think blockchain, especially with the narratives around crypto, especially around COVID, that has shaped a lot of opinions, but I don't think many people know how blockchain works, because it is kind of a complicated technology. And I think when I am thinking of the podcast, being able to break down these topics so that the masses can understand what's actually happening, what are the impacts of these technologies and how they work, is just going to help foster a better consumer of these and users of these technologies, so that when you hear in the news something's happening, it's not just, I don't know, it's wait, I actually have a deeper understanding of the mechanisms and the underlying principles of what's going on. And so that's one of the things that really excites me, is being able to help promote, critical thinking and knowledge on these pretty complex topics that, we're fortunate to live during this time. And it's really cool that we get the opportunity to talk about these things that I think a lot of people want to learn more about.
Absolutely. And I think, it is one of the goals of having a podcast associated with the lab, right? That it's not just us building things and having conversations within the lab, which is a relatively small amount of people, but then also saying, how can we expand beyond this group? How do we talk about the things that we're reading, the things that we're discovering in the lab, the things that we're seeing as we interact with these technologies? And how do we challenge others to rethink the way they approach technology or even approach their day-to-day lives, and how they think about, just work, how they think about organizations, how they think about government, how they think about voting, how they think about, all these supply chains, all these processes. Like, can we get people to reconsider them and think critically about them in the face of these new technologies, and the impacts they have more broadly? And I think that's why we're here. Those are the questions we want to ask. That's what gets me excited. And my hope is that, through talking about these things amongst ourselves, there's a contagion that other people are excited as well.
Totally. Well, Alex, I mean, I think that's a pretty good introductory episode. Is there anything you want to add before we maybe just call it?
No, I think we just keep asking what if, right? Just
Yeah.
keep saying what could it be? How do we design this, and how do we make a world that's I'll say better now, but how do we design a world that is better than where we're at right now, given the technologies that are being created around us?
That's awesome. Okay, well, guys, that was it. That was the first ever If Lab podcast. We're hoping to produce maybe weekly, bi-weekly. We'll see how it goes. We're still figuring it out. But I think we're going to have a lot of really awesome conversations and going to talk to a lot of interesting people. So I think, stay tuned. And as the classic YouTuber, hit the subscribe button. Follow us on Instagram. Yeah. Keep asking what if.